So, welcome officially, everybody, to OPA Live, the healing wisdom of medical astrology. So, we're going to start today with our first speaker, Laura Desjardins, and her topic is medical astrology and lunar energy. Laura is a multimedia personality, having been interviewed by many TV, radio, and national magazines. She's the author of Midpoint Keys, the report writer, and Midpoint Keys, the book. She has been the director of SCAN since 1986 and the former director of the Michigan Astrological Association. She has lectured throughout the world and is best known for her work with midpoints. So we're really happy to have Laura here. She's coming to us from Orange County these days, and she's got a great presentation for you all. And Laura,
Well, I'm
take it
going to
away.
get started here.
I
I'm going
want you to
go
get
in.
started.
Okie dokie. So I don't know what level each one of you are at, but medical astrology, to try to narrow it down to a half hour, is pretty hard to do, but I'm going to give it the best I can. And then the questions and answers, we can answer a lot of the extra questions you'll have. So we all look back to Hippocrates because of the medical influence, but you can see here, he felt that if you didn't know astrology, you really couldn't use this tool. Oops. Let's see. There we go. And these are different pictures that are everywhere, but you can see that the head has the influence over the sign of Aries, and the opposite point is Libra. So we always have an opposite point. These opposite points are really used when we're looking at new moon, full moon. New moon is always in the sign that the sun is in. The full moon is always in that opposite sign. So one of the key things about this axis is this is an acid condition, and most illness, if it's on a physical level, comes in from acid to Libra alkaline. So let's take a look at that in a moment. And here's another one of these figures, and this one came out of 1555. That's how far back they were using this. But, in the classes that I teach, I let you know that astrology goes back to the earliest written records, which even includes the medical part of it. So this is the thing that I really want you to think about, and that is that we first start with our spiritual side. If that's out of balance, then the second level to this would be the psychological. And you can hear it if a person is in therapy, they might be ranting about something, or they might be avoiding something in that therapy session. That's when you know that there are issues that are hidden beneath that. And the final level is the physical level. So if we don't get the other two straight, then we finally come to this. And what would be a spiritual? Not telling the truth, not being present, not being conscious, maybe using drugs or alcohol to kind of avoid being present. So back to this alkaline acidity issue, that's gigantic when reading, to see how much energy is being put into through diet, even, especially through diet, you see it, the acid alkaline. And now diabetes in the United States, at least, is, they're saying 2 out of 5. It's a lot of people have diabetes. And so here's something to really look at. If you're looking at a person and you're wondering if there are any medical issues, start with the head and go down through the body. So the head is ruled by Aries and the planet Mars. But one day I was with my daughter, and always think of these little stories because they really help you to get it. And this guy walked by, we were having lunch, and this guy walked by, and I said to my daughter, he's a musician, and she goes, "You don't know that." And I go, "Yeah, I do." And she goes, "Well, how do you know?" And I said, because look at his hair. He's got to be maybe 21, 22. That means he's getting high all the time. Neptune, music, Neptune. And he probably just isn't laying off of it. In other words, this is his way to get in touch with music. Then the guy walks back and my daughter smiles at him and he stops and he goes, "Hi, do I know you girls?" And she goes, "No, but my mother says you're a musician." And he goes, "How did you guys know? Here's my card." And so I laughed about it because I thought we need to really be observing. So, and I have story after story with regards to this specific area because you can always see it. I had a girlfriend who said, "I can't stand it any longer." And I said, "If you keep saying that, you won't be able to stand." And then it came about where she hated her job, she hated her work. All of these words go Saturn. Saturn rules the knees. And so she ended up not being able to actually stand any longer, had to have surgery on the knee and got out of that job that she couldn't stand. So keep in mind what someone is saying. That is one of the clues. Also, was a man one day that I saw who had a broken arm. And I said, "Oh, did you have any difficulties with communication?" And he started to scream at me and said, What are you talking about?" And I went, whoa. He obviously did have an issue with communication because he goes, "I don't have a problem with communication." And I decided, oh, okay, all right. These are things you've got to be careful with. One time I did tell somebody something. They had Saturn conjuncting the sun in their birth chart. And I said, "Oh, you should check on your father and make sure everything's okay." And so he goes home that night and his father dies of a heart attack. Saturn sun can be a heart attack because of the constriction of the valves in the heart. So you can see, obviously, he was pretty upset, thought I was a witch, and wouldn't give me any more books because I was buying these books from him on metaphysical. And his wife finally told me, "He's really upset because you said that." So we do have to be careful sometimes of what we say. And this was years ago, so I've learned to be really careful with that, although I didn't say anything wrong at the time. All right. So this head to toe observance is very important. And again, here's another one of these pictures where it shows you everything that these planets rule. So it's very fast, or signs rules. Let's go, and these are the planets. And so if you have an affliction to one of these planets, then it becomes really important. So what's an affliction? That is where there are hard aspects. What's a hard aspect? Could even be a conjunction. Not very often, but it can be a conjunction, but it can be an opposition, which is 180 degrees away. Astrology is based on geometry. So we're taking these planetary positions in the birth chart and making aspects to them. And it is like I consider them angels of light and how much light you're able to receive. And when it's like an opposition, it means full light is there because that represents the full energy or a full moon type of energy. So we know that each one of these is, if it's afflicted, and affliction could be a semi-square, sesqui-square. These are big aspects when you're using the 90-degree dial, which is taking a regular 360-degree chart and folding it twice. So you get 1/4 of the information put on a 90-degree dial, but you get 4 times the information that you would get in a regular chart. So it's advisable to learn that tool. So ask yourself, are any of these planets afflicted? My planet Uranus is afflicted. So it's about the only affliction I've got in the chart on the 360. On the 90, whole different story. All right, so let's see. This is where I go into these planetary positions and what they mean. And I want to actually go into another one first, and then I'll go back to this one. So here is the lunar cycle. And this, I like to relate this to beauty, and you can look a lot of this stuff up. If you went to the Farmer's Almanac, has a lot of information about new moon and full moon. So remember, a new moon is the new beginning on anything. I'm just happening to use this for beauty, but you could use this for anything that you wanted to. So the new moon represents the beginning of a new phase. Now, let's just say we put that new moon in the sign of Taurus. Then that's the time to get your hair cut and let it keep growing, depending on what your purpose is. Like if you didn't want to let that hair grow, you wanted it to stay shorter for a while, then you would get that cut on the full moon as opposed to the new moon. What's the best new moon to use? Taurus, because Taurus rules the hair. And or having a good Venus aspect, but still make use of the new and full moon. Venus being the natural ruler for the hair. Now, we always get our nails done. And so if you're getting your nails done at least once a month, even guys get their nails done now. I think it's kind of cool. So they're into the whole plastic surgery and everything else also. Plastic surgery, I'll cover that in a moment. Because that becomes fascinating when you get into that, and or even into a medical chart. It's fascinating because you do have to work with the new and full moon. So the nails are ruled by Mercury. Remember, our hands, our arms, our effective communication, respiratory system, all different layers of that position. But to get your nails done, it would be to get it done when the planet is in Gemini, the new moon in Gemini. Now, there's only one new moon a year that will be in Gemini. So obviously, then you'd want to get a good aspect from Mercury, but still work with a new moon because you want your nails to grow. If you don't want them to grow and you want that, then you would start at the full moon and go from the full moon back to the new moon. So plastic surgery, you never do a surgery when the moon is in the sign that rules that part of the body. I think it's like too much energy there, but especially a full moon. I remember years ago, John Wayne, when he died, he had just had 10 hours of surgery when the moon was in Cancer, and he had stomach cancer. And so he ended up dying from that surgery a few days later. So this really tells you, don't play around with this full moon energy, because it makes the blood is a lot more involved, or there's more water, there's more buildup in the body. You don't want that moon in that sign. Now, if you're having surgery, you actually want a positive aspect from the planet Mars, which cuts, and the planet Pluto, which eliminates. So these are all part of what we're looking for when it comes to how to use this type of energy, let it flow. But this is where it gets difficult doing a medical chart, because nobody's perfect. But you do learn. I've been doing this now 51 years, 5-1, and it's a lifetime in process of learning. All right, let's look at this. So here's the sign Aries. We're going to simplify this. The sign Aries rules the head, the face, brain, eyes. There's a dual rulership on this brain. The planet Uranus gets involved with the thinking process, or fast thinking. Taurus, the throat, neck, thyroid gland, vocal tract. Gemini, arms, lungs, shoulders, hands, nervous system. These are where our pitfalls can happen. Why? Because we aren't using that energy. Now, we have planets in these signs. It's not like just the sun sign. This happens to, we're working right now with the sun sign. But in addition, let's say Venus was in the sign of Cancer. That would be a completely different interpretation. So Cancer is the chest, breast, stomach. Leo, the heart, the chest, in that it rules this upper part through the whole upper part of the body. And then it rules the spinal cord, the upper back though, not the lower back. The lower back is Virgo. Virgo rules not only the digestive system, but the intestines, spleen, nervous system, and the base of the spine, which is the nerve center of the body. Hence, Virgos many times have problems with the discs in the spine. And I had a guy who was getting a reading, a corporate reading. There was a whole group of men getting a reading. And he walked in so stiff, and I thought, oh, he's a Virgo. So he sat down and he said, I'm a Virgo. And I said, yeah, I got it. I said, did you have surgery on your back, on the discs? And he goes, oh my God, you can see that. And I said, yeah, I can see it. It was like obvious. This is why observing is so important to observe. The sign Libra, the kidneys, skin, sugar levels in the body. Obviously, diabetes is gigantic right now. Scorpio, the reproductive system, sexual organs, bowels, excretory system, or elimination. Sagittarius, the hips, thighs, liver. Remember the liver, our seat of our knowledge. Sciatica, that nerve that goes down. If you have an affliction, you could have one of these issues here. Capricorn, the knees, joints, skeletal system. I was interviewed one day on the radio, and this lady was a Capricorn, and she ran a clinic she was a chiropractor. So, I mean, all of this fits Capricorn, or Saturn. And I said to her, have you ever had problems with your knees? When she revealed she was a Capricorn, and she goes, oh my God, I had knee surgery twice. And I said, huh. I said, well, that's using astrology in part of your ability to clinically figure out what's wrong with somebody. I said, because the astrology is one of the greatest tools you could use. Then Aquarius, ankles, calves, circulatory system, and Pisces, the feet, toes, lymphatic system. Does that mean you're going to have a problem if you're this sign? No, it means that you could have a planet, though, that could have an issue if it is in hard aspect to the ruler of these. So let's look at the ruler. The sun rules the sign Leo. That's the heart and the general vitality that we have. The moon rules the stomach, our digestive system, and our breath. Mercury, hands, shoulders, central nervous system. Venus, throat, sense of touch, and the ovaries. There's a lot of other things that these rule, but these are the most important that I thought I should give. Mars, the muscles, the head, the adrenal glands, and the sense of smell, which is interesting. Venus rules most of the senses, but not the sense of smell. Jupiter is the liver, thighs, growth, pituitary gland, Saturn, skin. So Saturn becomes a very interesting planet because it rules the innermost part of the body and the outermost part of the body. So it rules the bones, and then it rules the skin. So that means that it leaps into another state of consciousness. Now, it's the last planet that we can actually visually see. Neptune rules the pineal gland and the psychic healing. A lot of it rules the sign Pisces. And so the feet become very important, but also the highest point in the body becomes the other side of this. Hence, Pisces has two levels of consciousness. One is here, the other is on the other astral plane. Pluto, reproduction and elimination. And then let's cover this. So the Aries type of personality could have problems when it comes to how they react to something. Having outbursts of anger or doing something suddenly, without warning, that they're getting ready to do this. When those things happen, and it's called the acid personality, and does that mean all Aries are like that? Absolutely not, thank God. We all have Mars somewhere in our chart, and we all have Aries somewhere in our chart. So remember that. Taurus, overindulgence. They have a tendency to love good food, and they're connoisseurs, but it's when it becomes too comfortable is at the root of most of these disorders that they have, and especially in the throat area. I had a client who had throat cancer, and he was a Taurus. And at the time, Pluto was in opposition to his sun. He was so angry, he held it in the throat area, and he was mad that he had been let go of a job he was at for 30 some years, but he hadn't kept up with the time. So, and he did end up dying from that. These Pluto aspects are very, very important to watch and look at. Gemini, the indecision. We know Geminis are always trying to figure out, okay, I've got two things I can do. Which one do I want to do? So that duality causes problems for them, and not listening. To be an effective communicator means to listen. All right, the sign Cancer, way too emotional. That moon, the ruler of the sign, is moving through is moving into another zodiac sign every 2.5 days. So here we have this continual change. My daughter's a Cancer, and my son's a Taurus. So I do know how this energy works watching them. But there's an attachment to the past and to the family dynamic. And also making bad choices when it comes to food. And that moody, broody, remember that was what we learned when we first got into astrology, that Cancer carries some of that. This is if it gets out of hand is when these things come up. Leo is illness they're overexerting themselves, going overboard, and these ego issues. The only time I had a guy or a lady try to take over a class she was a Leo, and she kept questioning me to the point that I finally said, okay, would you like to come up and teach this? And then everybody burst out laughing and clapped as I said it, because they all realized, oh my God, she's just trying to take over. So that is that self-centered, or not realizing, she didn't even realize that everybody there thought she had gone overboard. So, all right, Virgo, tendency to have problems being too perfect. And, I have a moon in Virgo, which helps for medical astrology, but other areas, no. It's like it's too much. So it's being too critical or over analyzing a situation and becoming repetitive very quickly. Yeah, obviously there's beautiful sides of Virgo, but this is the negative side. And I had a Virgo one time who I wanted to introduce to another Virgo. So she had a friend, and she said, well, what sign are they? And I said, Virgo. She goes, well, absolutely not. She goes, that's the last sign I want to hang out with. I said, why? You're a Virgo. And she goes, that's why I don't want to hang out with them. They're going to be just like me. So I thought, yeah, I get it. Libra, trying to be too sweet. And we all know people who do that. They're not being authentic. So if these are issues that come up, there could be problems with the kidneys. Needing to be liked is a real Libra thing. Scorpio, jealousy. Issues surrounding the desire nature really needs to be perfected, as well as being overly controlling. They like to keep things within their sphere, all controlled. That are the key issues are sex and money for them. Sagittarius, their philosophical issues revolve around the need to concentrate that energy. Jupiter, the ruler of Sag, is a gaseous planet. So it's like, I call it the BSer. And once that starts to get out of hand, and we all know somebody who it has gotten out of hand. I knew one guy who, I said, well, what do you do and he gave me a list of at least 10 things. And I said, do you make money at any of those? Do you make your living doing that? No. He was just interested in all those things. So it was fascinating. So the liver is the key area, but it revolves around the belief system. Capricorn, their issues deal with just the opposite, where they're and that's where you see the progression of each sign. So the sign of Sagittarius is overly expanding. Sign Capricorn brings it all in, becomes a control freak when it comes to structure. And so they have inhibitions that are pretty big. And so they block things and harden within, because it is ruled by the planet Saturn, which is the densest planet in our zodiac. Then the sign of Aquarius. Again, we merge into another state of consciousness. Why? Because there's this need to free ourselves from that overly structured identity. So Aquarius is the rebel. They're not going to do what the Capricorn is doing. And now Pluto being in Aquarius is a pretty big deal because of that freeing of that old man mentality running the country for us. But it's also, and that's either one of them. We need new blood coming in at this point with that Pluto. Pluto's who's in power, and so it'll be interesting to see how this plays itself out. It's going to be like a story. It'll be interesting. So Aquarius is overly eccentric, and they need to learn to blend some of that Capricorn energy with that rebel. The sign Pisces, too sensitive to one's environment, really sensitive in every area. If a person is afflicted from the planet Neptune or the sign Pisces, you'll see that everything bothers them. Carpet bothers them, scent bothers them, water, mold. Mold is the biggie for Pisces, or the planet Neptune. Becoming a victim. That's the other part. Always complaining about how bad things are. You
5
you
minutes,
get so you
Laura.
laugh at some of it. Hi.
Five
Pardon me?
minutes, Laura. 5 minutes.
Okay, good enough. So in these last 5 minutes, I want to run through this really quick. Aries deals with the energy process, Taurus, recuperative forces, breathing and prana, Cancer for Gemini. Cancer deals with our ability to assimilate nutrition. Leo, vitality, moving from the Kundalini. Remember, this Kundalini is just really important. It's between two signs, though, Leo and Aquarius. Assimilation is Virgo, and absorption. Libra, balance and equalizing. Remember, it's when day and night are equal on the autumn equinox. Scorpio, procreation, reproduction. Sag, distribution of energy. Capricorn, preservation and reserve of energy. Aquarius, circulation and that chi. Remember, it opposes this Leo point, so it picks it up. And then the lymphatic process for the sign of Pisces. All right, so I want to do something here, a new share, so that you can see this. I don't know how many of you use this, but I wanted to show Carlos Castaneda's chart. So here's his birth chart, but in the birth chart, you're not going to see where the real issues are. So here, and he has a Mercury, this is a 90-degree dial, it changes everything. So I wanted to see, because he was published, a total of 15 books were published, and I wanted to see if he had a Mercury Jupiter. Mercury is writing, Jupiter's publishing, and he did. Now, when did these books first come out? When he was age 27, between 26 and 27 years old. But here you can see this is 25, 26, 27 is when this Mercury Jupiter. When did he die? 1972 and a half, almost a half. when he was 72. It was 1998, April 98. And he was born, by the way, on Christmas, December 25th. So what is touched off on that day? Again, the Mercury to Jupiter. What did he tell everybody? He told everybody, including all the witches and brujas and brujos that he worked with, that he was transcending, that there would be no physical body. He would transmute into this other level of consciousness. Well, that didn't happen. So here's the other thing that happened when he was 72. Neptune is the ruler of Cancer, and it opposed that Jupiter to Mercury at the age of 72 and a half. Jupiter being the liver, he died of liver cancer. But his writings had something to do with this. So we don't know what spirit has in store for us, but I thought, my God, how revealing that a 90-degree dial, not adding any transits in. This is just degree arc that I put there. Degree arc worked. Degree arc meaning 1 degree per year times 72 and a half years gave us the exact aspect that he died under, which was in his birth chart. So I've been doing some studies with this, and I am finding, I'm a Scorpio, so I'm finding that a lot of people, when they die, it's exactly the same as what was in the birth chart. The signature was in the birth chart on a 90-degree dial, touched off again when they passed. All right, there's a lot of information, I know, but I wanted you to all see it, and I know most of you don't know what a 90-degree dial is, but believe me, it's worth its weight in gold. And then I had one other area. I've got a class that I'm going to start on medical astrology next weekend, and Stephanie will be helping me with that. I think she is in the group here today. Anyway, it'll start on the 17th at 9:15. I had a great chart for that. All right, I'm gonna move it on. I think I'm right to the wire here.
Thank you so much, Laura. It was a great talk. We have some questions. From Katya, I read that Saturn rules nails when it comes to protection, and Venus plus when it comes to beauty. Why should we make our nails when the moon? Why should we make our nails when the moon is in Gemini? She didn't see the logic.
Gemini is ruled by Mercury. So what rules the nails? Mercury. And so you want Mercury in positive aspect, but only one time a year is there a new moon or a full moon in Gemini. So you actually want to use a positive aspect for Mercury, but you could use any full moon as long as it's in positive aspect.
The next question is from Winter. I have a Cap Sun with Mars, Venus, Moon, and Jupiter in Scorpio opposed by Saturn. I have chronic knee issues, and last year on the day midway between the Scorpio season's eclipses, I re-injured my knee, which required surgery. I guess it's not a question, just a comment. Alicia would like to know.
I also would add to that there could have been a obstruction for the father, because that Saturn opposed those planets that were, I think you said a Capricorn sun, but those other planets were in Scorpio with Saturn opposing it.
Yeah.
I would wonder then about how the father passed.
Oh, interesting. Alicia asks, can the panelists?
The father.
Alicia asks, can the panelists please give sources of their information? So, do you have some of the sources? There's many, I would imagine.
51 years of doing the same thing. Because of my moon in Virgo, I always wanted to see, but there's many books out there. There's one just on medical astrology that's like that. Although most of this is through observance.
Perfect. A lot of thank yous. And can you give more information on your class? So maybe you can type that into the text for people. Let me see. Winter said her dad died on the 17th of January. That's interesting.
Wow. when the sun was in Capricorn, but what did he die of?
She
Because
may.
I think it's
Oh,
probably a Saturn aspect.
oh, and Kira
he
says
just
the book on
died?
medical. Yeah.
Oh.
So the Kira says the big book on medical astrology is with Cornell and the Cornell Encyclopedia of Medical Astrology.
Mhm.
And Winter said dementia and COVID.
Oh, they want me to talk about it?
No, she said that her dad died of dementia and COVID. Mhm.
Oh my goodness. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Okay.
Sad.
Thank you so very, very much.
Welcome.
All right. So if you would like to unshare, O and K is back.
Okay.
Great. So our next speaker, Kay, did you want to introduce Kira?
Yeah, thank you. I made it back.
You
Thank
did.
gosh for technology. So yeah, I'm so excited to introduce Kira and Kira Sutherland and her talk on stress and the rising sign. Kira is a highly experienced, award-winning naturopath, nutritionist, herbalist, and medical astrologer living in Australia, which of course is why we are starting this event a little later than normal. She divides her time between clinical practice and writing and lecturing on these subjects and is known for her vibrant, straightforward teaching style. She has lectured around the world and uses her 25 years of clinical experience and vast knowledge of healing in combination with her passion for medical astrology into a beautiful mix of mind-body medicine. And I would say Kira is one of the first medical astrologers I ever heard give a talk.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And
Oh, I didn't know that, Kay.
Delighted to see you here with OPA.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for having me. And thank you for everybody tuning in. And oh my gosh, it's so good that I went second, because that Laura's lecture covered so much of the basics. I don't have to feel like I have to go over anything like that. So that's awesome. For those of you who didn't see me text, I have sent OPA my slides, so you can have the PDF or send me an email directly, and I'm happy for you to have my slides. Don't try to write them down. They tend to be wordy. So this is one of my favorite areas of medical astrology. The rising sign, ascendant, I'm going to swap between those terms, but the first house and the rising sign are just so vital when we're looking at our overall health. So I thought it would be fun to kind of really just focus there. So there's a million things in medical astrology, obviously, but we're going to take it down to just one area. So let's have a look. One of my favorite medical astrologers who passed away in probably the 1980s, not maybe he did, was Robert Jansky. And I love this statement. The study of your star map will show you your natural fitness, your tendencies, and the lines of least resistance for your best success. Then it is within your power to follow up these leadings and make success of your life, talents, and powers. And you know, where I'm lecturing from today, I would say would be more of a modern style of medical astrology. I do both, you know, I come from a traditional roots of medical astrology, as you need to, but there's also modern interpretation of how to actually work with your health and support your body. And so that's really where I'm coming from today, is that medical astrology, naturopathic side of, yes, we can see a lot of things going wrong with us, or we can do a decumbrature or horary chart for what's happening with our health, but there's also about looking at our natal chart and learning how to best support our physical body. And so that's where I'm really coming from today. So I hope you enjoy this. So really, your natal chart is this beautiful blueprint, or this map. You know, I think of it like a blueprint or a treasure map that's going to teach you your strengths and your weaknesses, how to support yourself, where we need to be cautious. But again, before attempting any treatment, and I am actually suggesting different things today, I actually have different herb suggestions, activities, supplements. This is not me giving a prescription for anybody. This lecture is educational purposes only. Before you make any changes, please see a healthcare practitioner or consult with somebody who knows what they're doing about this. Natural medicines might be natural, but they can be just as dangerous as prescriptive medications. They can interact with prescriptions. So do not just go and go, oh, Kira said this herb is great for this sign. Please don't go and take that without kind of checking, especially if you're on other medications, because there can be interactions. So before we actually get into the rising sign, Culpeper, Nicholas Culpeper, who was around in the 1600s, whose medical astrology I love, herbalist medical astrologer. This is this incredible list. And you kind of go, oh my God, why is she teaching me these weird little, tendencies towards illness? But I want you to realize, health is this beautiful, it's not just one, you're either healthy or you're not. Health is this continuum around, that we make choices every day. But, if we had very bad health or even death at one end of a continuum and, optimum health at another, you can't always, well, hopefully you're not going to stay at the bad end, but it's not a solid point. It's this continuum that you're always moving back and forth on. And it's all the little choices that we make every day that have the biggest impact on our health. Yes, there's accidents, there's transits, there's, injuries, and we catch things. But if we stop and actually listen to our body, it is always giving us signs and signals and little, I want to say red flag is extreme, but, little flags as to what's going on. And I love this list that Culpeper put together. These indicate a neutral state of being heading towards illness. And we swipe a lot of these under the carpet. We just kind of go, oh, my sleep is a bit disturbed, or I'm a bit forgetful today. I mean, we know that there's reasons behind each of these, but if some of these, and again, I'm not going to list off of these because I'm sure you've read them while I've been talking, but it's interesting to realize how often we experience these things, and they are the body trying to sign us, trying to get our attention that something is a little askew. And one of the best places to focus on when things are going a little awry is, looking at obviously what planet is causing you trouble. But one of the best things to do is looking at adjusting or supporting your rising sign and your first house, because that is in charge of your physical body. So let's get into that. Look, just to talk about the rising is really hard. So I did put in this, I did put this in. I look at the entire natal chart. I look at transits, progressions, solar arcs. I do a decumbiture or a horary chart for when people ask questions. But in general, when we're just looking at a natal chart, the things I really focus on are first house and the ascendant. We're gonna, we always need to look at that sixth house, also the first house, the ruler of the first or lord of the first. We're going to look at the sixth house, any planets within the sixth, lord of the sixth, the ruler of the sixth. We also need to look at traditional house of illness. And again, I'm going to look at the sun and the moon. I'm going to look at everything, but I just needed to remind you, the ascendant isn't everything that we look at by any means. But let's just talk about the ascendant. So this is by far the most sensitive point for your physical body. It's, the doorway into the chart, but the way I like to describe it to my clients or classes is it's, we always talk about the ascendant being this mask that we wear, this filter that we put things through, if we're talking about regular astrology, not medical. But the way I see the ascendant is it's like our shield. Like if we were all Viking warriors or whatever kind of warrior you want to be, it's the shield that the world comes into contact with us. So it's how we try to protect ourselves, but it's also what gets the most hits and physically can become the weakest part of the chart or the trigger point to our physical body. people will talk about appearance coming from the rising sign. It will also be influenced by moon, by sun, by other things, but absolutely your physical appearance has a lot to do with that ascendant and the first house. And it's very much, it's the first thing I would really look to if we're talking about someone's constitutional health. And when I mean constitutional health, it's their overall core vitality, strength, or weakness of. And you often look to the element of the rising sign for how strong that rising or constitution is going to be. So it's considered that fire is the strongest of the rising signs. Then some sources will say air is the next strongest because of fire and air being those yang, or traditionally referred to as masculine elements. Earth would be the next strongest. There's also in some sources it will say earth is stronger than air. So I'm just going to leave those two with you there. And then water is considered the weakest of the constitutions because water is receptive and attracts things. And so, there's other things that will detract or strengthen a constitution, but it is an interesting thing to look at. Also, what planets are sitting in the first, what aspects are happening to the ascendant or planets in the first. But what I want to remind everybody is it's not the end of the world if you don't have a strong constitution. I find those people who have a very strong constitution don't often have a lot of health stuff happen earlier in their life. So they don't end up having to take great care of themselves or their physical body because things just don't go wrong. And if things don't go wrong, we all have that friend that can eat absolutely anything they want. They drink like a fish. They might even smoke and they're never sick. Whereas other people don't have that strength of constitution. But what happens to people with really strong constitutions is as they age, there are transits and other triggers in sixth house. But if you haven't had to take care, you haven't learned the little things to do for yourself. So when things do go wrong as they age, it's much harder for them to adjust and make those changes. So I actually think those of us, because I might be including myself here, that don't have the world's strongest constitutions, we learn those little symptoms. We, like what Culpepper was talking about, we learn how to make those adjustments. So don't freak out if you don't have a strong constitution or lots going on in that first house with hard aspects, because you tend to be the ones that are, you have lots of little things go wrong, but hopefully those don't lead to the bigger things. So I hope that makes sense. So again, first house ascendant is how we react under stress. If you look at body rulerships, Aries, Mars, and the first house all have a shared rulership of the adrenal glands. So the adrenals are these little glands that sit on top of our kidneys, ruled by Libra, opposite sign, or Venus. So your adrenals are what pump out your stress hormones, cortisol, adrenaline. And so when we get stressed, the whole idea around this chart and looking at stress and the rising sign is when we're stressed, no matter what's getting triggered off in the chart, because you can be stressed by other things happening, the energy does ricochet us back to our ascendant, because as I talked about, we go into battle. We come in with our shield, and our battle is the ascendant in our first house. And so that's what takes the brunt of stress, besides maybe what else is getting triggered in the chart causing the stress. So we enter battle with that first house. So it's why it's so important, as well as it being in charge of your physical body, it's why we really need to focus on this area. So again, ascendant, lord or ruler of the ascendant, we're always going to look at the situation that's in. We're going to look at all the planets. If you have planets sitting in the first house or things within maybe 5 degrees of the ascendant, so something sitting in the 12th house by 5 degrees. And again, we're going to look at aspects to the ascendant and aspects to the planets within the first to kind of overall look at constitution and how what comes to the party when we are under stress. I've kind of talked about the adrenals a little bit already as a stress point. So, you know, when we get stressed, when these hormone, you know, cortisol and adrenaline get activated, it sets up an inflammatory state in the body. And when we're stressed, inflammation is not great. A lot of illness is preceded by states of inflammation. Mars ruling, you know, inflammation in itself. But also when we're stressed and have high cortisol, this suppresses our immune system. I'm not saying the first house rules the immune system or the ascendant, but high stress will suppress the immune system. Our energy levels very much come from this area as well. And when we're stressed, it also triggers off our nervous system. Again, not ruled by the, well, it depends what your ascendant is, but the first house doesn't rule the nervous system. But once the adrenals are activated and we go into our stress response, it's our nervous system that then gets hyperactivated and we go into what we call sympathetic dominance. And your sympathetic nervous system is fight flight. It's like there's danger, I've got to escape, or I've got to fight. And this is where this inflammation in the body comes into this reaction. So when we trigger that first house in the adrenals, we do also trigger or suppress the immune system, and we put our nervous system into overdrive. And when we're in sympathetic dominance, what it does is it's because we're supposed to fight flight, we're supposed to run from danger, it suppresses or it decreases the function of our digestive system, of our relaxing ability, our ability to sleep. And it's like a seesaw: sympathetic, fight, flight; parasympathetic, digest, relax. And so this is where, you know, when we trigger by stress, this whole first house, so many other cascades happen that deplete our health. So I do have a little list. You can look at these slides. I'm gonna bypass the next two slides really, but it's just looking at benefic or malefic or hard aspects from different planets to our rising sign, and you can kind of weigh out, you know, if it depletes or, you know, pulls, you know, slightly weakens the rising sign or slightly, you know, increases its strength. Like benefic aspects from Venus and Jupiter will strengthen that rising sign and aid your recuperative ability. But I'm actually don't want to go through these. I just left them in here for more things to look at for yourself. Here's more the hard aspects. I do use outer planets when we're looking at medical astrology. I can't, you know, I can't not look at them because I see so many health elements triggered by issues to do with people's own natal outers or by transit. So I do use all the planets as well as Chiron. But again, I don't want to read through these. You can look at these later when you have the slides. Let's talk about how to support. I'm all about, let's be functional. Let's, you know, yes, I can teach medical astrology, but one of my favorite things coming from my naturopathic background is teaching you what to do about it, because it's good, you know, it's all good to know what the problem is, but how are you supposed to approach it? So when I go to support the ascendant, I will be supporting the sign on the ascendant. I will be supporting the state of the ruling planet of the ascendant, no matter where it is in the chart. And I will go and support any planet hanging out in the first house. If we see big transits coming to the ascendant, not every transit is going to be a physical ailment, but I'm definitely going to support before the transit or progression or whichever you use, because forewarned is always better to support. So you're more ready for it. You're not depleting that area, hopefully. But also this is what needs to be attended to. Let's look at it. We've got the physical body of the ascendant, but again, and Laura was talking about this, transits can be emotional, transits can be spiritual, it can be all kinds of things. So not everything is going to be a physical ailment. always, I'm going to be supporting that 6th house as well, the house of illness. In traditional medical astrology, we the 6th cusp, planets within, ruler of the 6th, we're going to need to support, because that is where a lot of health ailments will also, or weaknesses will come from. I'm going to actually support the whole natal chart, but again, that's lectures in itself. So things I do to support the 1st house and things within it. I'm going to look at foods that support a rising sign. And there are lists. I don't actually think I've included the list here, but there's a download on my website if you sign up for my emails that lists a bunch of foods that are great for each sign. And those foods are usually put together, those lists. It's not a rulership. It's that those foods contain the vitamins and minerals that are great for each of those signs, be it to help their certain systems that they rule function, or they're just nutrients that they often deplete. I love looking at activities and sports. Doesn't always have to be sports, but I do love looking at sports by element for each of the signs. If you were going to do one thing for your physical body in your life, yes, there's eating, yes, there's mental health, there's, herbs, there's nutrients. If you're going to do one thing to prevent chronic disease, the number one thing I would get people to do is movement, be it walking, swimming, running, biking, yoga. It activates the 1st house. It activates all movement, activates your adrenals in a positive way. Yes, you can over exercise, but we also know that exercise puts a challenge on the immune system, but it also strengthens how our immune system functions. We know as we age that if you exercise, it decreases your chance of many cancers by over 50%. So I will always look at sports and the rising sign, but also activities, be it creativity, music, drawing, and 1st house. Find some alone time. Find something that your ascendant loves to do by yourself. This is not selfish. This is self-care. We hear a lot about that in health these days. Find time and activities to go do by yourself, be it lying in bed and watching Netflix, reading, getting out in nature, whatever it is that ascendant and those planets love to be doing. That alone time of the 1st house is amazing to recenter yourself and find your strength and rest. Rest is always good. I use herbal medicines, especially to support the adrenals. There's articles coming from this lecture that list a lot more things. I know people are asking me about suggestions. There'll be an article in the OPA magazine coming out about different sports for the signs and different herbs. I use Bach or Bach flowers, flower essences, vitamins, minerals. This is just a list of things to go investigate for yourself. Again, sunrise, getting your eyes out in the full spectrum of light in the morning has incredible health benefits especially for our circadian rhythms, anti-inflammatory, to go out in nature. Great for our stress response. There was actually research done in Japan, is where they coined the term nature bathing, or forest bathing, sorry. And they actually took a bunch of university students in Japan and they put them in nature for like 30 minutes a day for 2 weeks out in the forest. And they took another group of university students and left them in Tokyo, out in the chaos of outdoors Tokyo, for 30 minutes a day for 2 weeks. And then they actually measured their cortisol levels and their adrenal hormones, stress response. And those that had been nature bathing out in the forest had incredibly much lower stress hormones going on. Their immune system was better. They were sleeping better. So don't underestimate just being out, sitting in nature, supporting that ascendant and the 1st house. I've kind of said some of this already, but exercise. People don't realize exercise is actually increases this beautiful chemical called BDNF, for the short, or brain-derived neurotropic factor, BDNF, which increases neuroplasticity. It increases brain growth and talking of neurons to each other. And just amazing. And again, this movement of your physical body of the first house, if we talk about, the brain and the nervous system are really more of a Mercury thing, or we could go into Gemini and Virgo, but the first house and Aries, there's this overlap between sign and house and planet in medical astrology, but the first house does have this rulership of the brain as well. And we get exercise and movement of your physical form actually helps with the increase of neuroplasticity. It helps with memory and cognition as we age. I've talked about energy levels. I've talked about the immune system. The number one way to prevent chronic disease is by getting this first house happy and going. And again, you exercise, you will sleep better. And I'm not saying the first house rules sleep by any means, but better food, better care of the physical body will enable you to sleep better as well. Yeah, so finding activities to nourish this first house. So again, this is not a prescription. Do not go out and take these. This is a historical information lecture. But if I were to list my favorite nutrients that I give to support the first house, this is my list of tops. I love giving magnesium. And again, if you're on blood pressure medications, other medications, be very careful of this, but I love giving magnesium because it really helps the body support the stress response, the nervous system. It supports the adrenals. When we're stressed, we absolutely wipe out our magnesium levels, as we do when we eat sugar or drink alcohol. Those are my three favorite forms in order of what I give magnesium in its form. Zinc, amazing. It's used in like 2,000 different things in the body, not just the immune system. And we need it for building muscle. CoQ10, which is for energy. B vitamins, all the B vitamins, but especially B5 and 6, which go to support our adrenal glands. If you feel like you have a little bit of extra money hanging around, glutathione is not cheap, but it's incredible for helping create energy in the body. Your adrenals, when we're stressed, we churn through our vitamin C as well. And again, D and K have nothing really to do with the adrenals, but super important for our immune system, for our overall health. So our overall physical body is why I put those there. Yeah. Okay. So, just checking my time. Again, this is a list of herbs for each sign. In the article I've written, I've actually got a different list. It has some crossover. The list in the article that's coming out has very specific adaptogens. So when we do herbal medicine, there's like herbs for the immune system, herbs for the liver, although a lot of herbs have crossover actions between different organs, which is why herbs are so amazing. But one of my favorite types of herbs are what we call adaptogens, which are herbs that support our body during the stress response. So they support our nervous system, they support our adrenals. So I thought that was a really appropriate list to put through in the article. But this list does contain at least one adaptogen for each of the signs. But what this is a list of common herbs that I use for each sign. I'm not saying you should go out and take all of these herbs by any means. If you're a Gemini, don't go out and take all 3 of those. You don't need them all at once, but it's just the list of my probably favorite herbs to reach for each sign. Some of it has to do with planetary rulerships of herbs, and some of it has to do with the actions of the herbs supporting each of those signs and their ruling body parts. So, but yeah, adaptogens are my absolute favorite to support the adrenals, like ginseng and rhodiola. Actually, under Aries, which we could also list as that first house, these are 3 adaptogens that I love. Withania, oh, let me back up too. Withania is called ashwagandha in North America. Sorry, it's I should have ashwagandha. I've typed really fast. I might have spelled it wrong. But ashwagandha and withania are the same thing. So just so people don't get confused. So anyway, these are just these great lists of what I use for each sign. And again, adaptogens are the ones that are going to support that stress response and the adrenals. So Taurus, licorice is an adaptogen. It does support the adrenals and the stress response. There's a little asterisk there because be aware, if you have high blood pressure or you're medicated for high blood pressure, you should go nowhere near licorice as a herb because it actually does slightly increase blood pressure, and that's quite dangerous. So that's, I mean, a lot of these herbs can interact with stuff, but licorice is the biggest one. Okay, so preventative medicine, you know, as a naturopath, I'm all about preventative medicine, about taking care of yourself when the little things go awry so that you don't have the big things happen. I really see supporting the ascendant, you know, no matter your sun or your moon or what's going on in the 6th, by supporting the ascendant, you hopefully are supporting the whole vitality and physicality of the body. There are always going to be health challenges, no matter how healthy of a life you live. But it's about tuning into that physical body and seeing what it's asking of you and not ignoring those little signposts, as Culpeper was showing us. You know, if we pay attention to the little things, hopefully we don't get the big roadblocks to do with our health. Yeah. And that's my 30 minutes. But yes, I could have gone about 5 hours with this topic, but anyway, questions?
Yes, I've got a couple of questions here.
Sure.
Let me just roll back up. It said, is the list for herbal medicine for rising sign or sun sign?
Both.
For
Either.
both?
And moon, you could move it for all, you could use it for all of those. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Great question.
And what form of zinc are you recommending?
Oh, look, Kim, I tend to use a chelate because it's hard for me to get a picolinate in Australia, but I do also like picolinate, but investigate which ones feel better for you. Yeah.
I have another question in the question and answer. How about nodes and hard or soft aspects to the ascendant?
Oh, sorry. Can you ask that question again?
Sure. How about nodes in hard or
Yes.
soft aspects to the ascendant?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, today's lecture was just on the ascendant, whereas, you know, there's always a conversation going on with your entire chart, you know, natally, and then there's a conversation of transits. But yes, I would absolutely watch what's going on with nodes, be it natal or by transit, because South node can be very depleting. It's where we can really lose a lot of energy, be it our own South node or the transiting node. We're going to be depleting in that area. Whereas the North node can be more where we bring in energy, although we can kind of blow ourselves out with the North node as well. We can kind of pull in too much. So we need to look at not overdoing it where that's going on as well.
Have another question.
Yes,
Does
it can be very involved. Sorry, it can be very involved in health transits. Yes.
Does magnesium have a therapeutic effect when used topically?
Yes. Some people I find get a much better result with it topically than other people. Don't feel it as much. You're not going to get the same impact as if you take it internally, though. Like, there's only so much magnesium that is going to come. The muscles that it's applied to topically are really going to probably sequester that magnesium. It's not going to make it into the system at that same level as you will if you ingest it. And let me also point out, and this is again just me as a practitioner, I'm not a fan of magnesium tablets. I find tablets have to be put together with binders, and it's much hard. A lot of us don't have great digestion as we age. I'm a much bigger fan of either capsules, or what I really prefer is powdered magnesium for people. And no, it doesn't taste great, but it's worth the effort.
Another question, what about Chiron, asked by someone who has Pluto crossing Chiron?
Yeah, absolutely. Chiron can be a trigger for health things. Absolutely. But it's kind of out of the scope of this lecture for me to go into that. But yes, Chiron's very involved in health stuff and bigger things we need to be looking at. But often it's our health stuff that slows us down. So we look at those other layers of Chiron.
Next question, do you use triplicity rulers for the health remedy uses and timing?
Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. Yeah, it just depends. It's also, there's so many different ways we can look at how to give treatment, but yes, that is one of the things I can take into account for sure.
And I've heard that when beginning to take magnesium, you are meant to start at a very low dose. What is the general recommendation for this?
Okay, I'm gonna, yes, starting anything is always smart to start low and build up. I'm not going to give dosages because that's me being prescriptive and I'm not treating anyone in the lecture. So I'm going to actually not answer that question.
Perfect. And I think that is the last of our questions.
Caution.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, if you look on jars of magnesium, you will see listed recommended dosages. Build your way up to what you see listed. It also depends on what form you're taking, how much of a dose you're giving. So yeah.
Oh, Carol, just
sorry to not answer that. Yeah.
Maybe you can answer this question while I look for Carol's. I missed hers. What
Sure.
about liquid magnesium, such as trace minerals from sea minerals?
If it's working for you, keep doing it. There are so many different forms of getting magnesium into the body. There's big dosages of magnesium. There's also using what are known as cell salts or tissue salts, which are homeopathic dosages of magnesium. And people can have, it's not going to fix an overt magnesium deficiency, but they also can be great. So yeah, if the form is working for you, go for it.
The last question is, being a Leo in ascendant puts my heart most at risk? That's the question. I was born with a small problem, so how much of the motherwort could help any heart problem?
So again, that's a specific question. Motherwort is actually a nervous system herb. Motherwort is this beautiful herb that's its botanic name or Latin name is actually Leonurus cardiaca, which means heart of the lion. But it's a nervous system herb, and we need to remember the cardiovascular system, as much as the heart is like a pump, the cardiovascular system is run by the nervous system. It's actually the electrics running it. So yeah, it's an incredible herb to support a Leo rising. Again, I'm not going to give a dosage, and it's not going to fix a heart problem per se. There's more to it than that. But yeah, Leonurus is a magical herb.
Thank you so much, Kira. That was so informative, as always. Go ahead.
Oh, let me just qualify. Someone's asked, motherwort and mugwort are totally different herbs, completely different herbs. Motherwort is Leonurus cardiaca, and mugwort is completely different. Look up their Latin names.
Thank you so very much, Kira. You're always just an amazing speaker. And I just can't, the amount of information that you provide is very, very good.
Scary. Sorry, there was one last little question. If you have Chiron about to cross the ascendant, oh my gosh, fortify. It doesn't have to be a physical ailment. It could be Chiron on all different levels, but absolutely fortify your physical body. it's a beautiful time and excuse to be selfish and pay attention to yourself. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Kara. Thank you for your entire talk. I believe Chiron is approaching my ascendant. And so that last little bit of information is taken in. And I also want to make sure I was thanking Laura for her previous talk, because I sort of parachuted in. I don't even remember what I said. But here we are for our third and final speaker of the day. And I'm delighted to introduce to you Michael Bryan. And Michael is a Bahamian Jamaican astrologer, journalist, author, and clinical hypnotherapist, specializing in hypnotic dream work. In May 2023, he published Mastering Traditional Astrology, A Depth of Beginning in the Celestial Art. I have this book by my bedside, and I'm hoping that it comes into me by osmosis, because it is a huge book. He is the founder of the Oraculus School of Astrology, where he offers a rigorous training program in concrete event-based astrology. He practices Renaissance and Uranian astrology in his client work, focusing largely on predictive and medical astrology research. With his healing practice, Michael is also a certified Iyengar yoga teacher and a Jikiden Reiki teacher. An avid student of the Western mystery tradition, he is entrenched in the world of Jewish mysticism, Hermeticism, alchemy, geomancy, and Kabbalistic tarot. That is a lot of words, Michael, and I am really, really happy to have you here today. I have a number of my students who have studied with you recently, so they tell me how disciplined and intense your course is. So we are thrilled to hear you on medical astrology today.
Thank you so much, Kay, and I'm very, very happy to be here. We made it. Okay, so we're going to dive in, and can I share my screen, Kay? Is that okay? Okay, awesome. So, hi everyone. I'm very happy to be here. I always love speaking for the Organization of Professional Astrologers, and we're going to dive right in to the talk for today. So let's see, share screen, and let's start the slideshow from here. All right, so our talk for today is Essential Medical Astrology. By yours truly, I'm an NCGR PAA Level 4 astrologer, and you can find out more information about me by visiting oraculosastrology.com. Now, I want to dive right in and say that I caught Laura's talk. I definitely caught Kira's amazing talk. And this notion of medical astrology vis-a-vis the signs of the zodiac is something that the two of them covered very, very well. And it is definitely one of the cornerstones of traditional medical astrology practice. Here we see a cutout, or a painting rather, of the physical correspondences of the body by way of the signs of the zodiac. Within Vedic astrology, this is called Kala Purusha, or the body of time. And the purpose of this is to show that on a microcosmic level, we are composed of the same constituent elements of the universe in the same way as this larger body of time is composed on a macrocosmic level. So the signs of the zodiac has always been a very rich template of astrological wisdom and correspondence from a traditional medical astrology perspective. And that definitely represents the majority of the sorts of medical astrology that we practice in the West, and not but. And for me, I tend to practice astrology from a more planetary-based perspective. And that's something that comes through traditional astrology in general, tends to be more planet-based, planet to planet. What are these planets doing with each other? And how does that reflect the concrete health events that occur within people's lives? And I don't really reference the zodiac at all, really, within the context of my specific approach to medical astrology. So today we're going to be taking a look at another angle of medical astrology, which is also vital, and that is understanding the planets on their own terms, as well as understanding the various ways in which planets impact other planets and how that shows up within the context of the horoscope. So first thing is, what is medical astrology? Dr. William Davidson, who was a medical astrologer who functioned within the 1960s, said that astrology is a blueprint of the forces that flow into the body and maintain it. And so clearly this is coming from someone who is a medical astrologer, because I don't think that we tend to walk around on a daily basis saying that astrology is a blueprint of the forces that flow into the body and maintain it. However, this is a very important piece, because when we look at a birth chart is fundamentally a kaleidoscope of possibilities. We can pick up a birth chart and read that birth chart purely from a psychological perspective. And within that context, everything within that birth chart becomes commentary on the soul and psyche of a person. We can pick up a birth chart and read it purely from a financial perspective. And from that perspective, everything within that birth chart becomes commentary on the financial well-being of a person. We can also pick up a birth chart and read it from a purely love-based perspective. And from that perspective, everything within that birth chart becomes commentary on the love language of that person and their natal promise as it relates to love within this lifetime. Dr. William Davidson is pointing out something very important in saying that the birth chart is a blueprint of the forces that maintain the physical body, because the same birth chart that can be read through all of these multiple lenses is also a birth chart that can be read purely from the perspective of using it as an index of the health and the vitality of people within this lifetime. He goes on to say that medical astrology is part and parcel of the everyday consultation, because there are so many problems that involve the physical state. Now, when I was coming into astrology, my template for medical astrology looked a lot like horary astrology, which I think is a fabulous and a fantastic tool. And I think it's a wonderful training ground for learning a lot of the principles that underpin traditional medical astrology practice. And when I tried to go deeper into my own practice, as well as deeper into traditional astrology, what I found is that whenever we see an example of a chart being read by a 17th century astrologer, a 13th century astrologer, a 15th century astrologer, there's always this starting place of reading a chart from a medical astrology perspective. And the reason for that is because within traditional astrology, the first house is our starting place for any sort of chart delineation. In traditional astrology, we don't have a concept of sun, moon, and rising as being the holy trinity in terms of how a chart is delineated, but we read a chart rather based on the ascendant, aspects to the ascendant, ruler of the ascendant, planets within the ascendant, and all of these things fashion for us an understanding of how that person is going to be manifesting within the world within this lifetime, and the physical realities that they find themselves coming in terms of the realities of their physical body. So the pragmatism of traditional astrology means that every reading begins with this assessment of health and vitality, as well as areas within the constitution that are weaker or areas within the constitution that are more prone to manifest as being sources of ailment within the lives of people as they continue to live their lives. So this is something very important for us to bear in mind, especially as astrologers on the verge of, I'm going to step into Uranian astrology land for a second, but from a Uranian astrology perspective, the year 2025 is the year when the world is really going to look at astrology with a more serious approach. And that is the year when the world is going to call the astrologer to stand on the world stage to reconstitute astrology as a vital part of an evolving global culture. So in my mind, I'm preparing for 2025 because I kind of think that that is the year of astrology. And I think that all of us, whether that's something that we believe or not, all of us are really living and practicing in a time when astrology now is more popular than ever before. So as we garner our skills, one of the foundational skills from the perspective of reading a natal chart is understanding how to read that chart from a medical astrology perspective, because that is the beginning, essentially, from a traditional standpoint of all natal charts delineation. So what does medical astrology do? This is a very important question. A student of mine once asked this, and she said, you know, we're not doctors, so we can prescribe. And I'm very happy that Kira mentioned that earlier in terms of the scope of practice. from an astrological perspective and from a medical astrology perspective, we really have to be mindful of what the scope of our practice is and what sorts of topics we can talk about if astrology is our only credential, and what sort of topics we can't talk about if astrology is our only credential. And definitely prescription is beyond the scope of our practice. Also, diagnosis in its purest traditional sense is beyond the scope of our practice. So it's important for us to understand what medical astrology do in general, as well as how we can find ourselves within it if our only credential for helping others is astrological. Medical astrology allows us to assess the general state of constitutional vitality or weakness. It points towards systems of the body that may be most prone to illness. It helps us understand the timing factors that were present at the beginning of the illness so that we can understand when the native or the person who has the chart is likely to experience periods of renewed health and vitality. And I think that this last point, actually, I think that all of these points, but I think this last point is of vital importance because within the context of our practice as astrologers, our point of mastery is that we are masters of time. We understand the nuances that tiny moments, or rather we understand the impact that tiny moments affect on global changes or global events. And we understand how these tiny moments reveal the story of the life that will unfold from those moments. And we do that far better than any other field. We're the only field that does it. We're the only field that studies time with the intention of understanding how time will unfold within the life of a person. So the timing factor surrounding medical astrology is of vital importance, and it's something that we should bring more strongly into our practice. Now, once again, saying hello to Kala Purusha, the body of time, and moving forward. I sincerely believe that the East points the way in a lot of things having to do with astrology in general. When you interact with a practitioner of Jyotish, and I say Jyotish because the term Vedic astrology isn't really used in India. In India, the term is Jyotish because that is the traditional name for that. And we find Vedic astrology as a concept being used more in the West to describe Jyotish. But when it comes to practitioners who come from India, and I no longer practice Jyotish, that was something I did many moons ago, but I do have a great level of respect for that practice because the Jyotishi or the practitioner of Jyotish astrology, which is kind of a dumb thing to say because Jyotish is astrology, but the practitioner of Jyotish is someone who doesn't just do horary astrology. That person knows how to do horary astrology, medical astrology, electional astrology, mundane astrology, predictive astrology, synastry, every level of astrological practice. We find that being embodied within the practitioner of a traditional Indian practitioner of Jyotish. Whereas in the West, so enamored are we by this notion of certification culture, we tend to want to pick up the horary astrology certification or the medical astrology certification or the mundane astrology certification or the electional astrology certification. So we have more of a splintered approach to how we view astrology in the West. And so we don't really find ourselves having the same sort of integration as the Eastern astrologer does. So I think that we should be looking towards the East in terms of having a guideline for how we should be practicing astrology in the West to begin with. Dr. K.S. Charak, in his book Essentials of Medical Astrology, tells us that texts on ancient Indian astrology, or I had to move something, pardon me, texts on ancient Indian medicine contain certain references to planetary combinations causing specific diseases. This is the bread and butter of everything that I do and everything that I practice, because my orientation towards astrology is far less signs of the zodiac based, and it's far more planetary combinations based. This is a stream of thought that we find coming through traditional astrology in general. And it's also a stream of thoughts that we find manifesting within Uranian astrology as a specific category or I'm not going to call it a branch of astrology, but it's a specific style of astrology, as well as cosmobiology, which is a specific style of astrology, where the relationship between planets based on the signs of the zodiac isn't as important as those planets coming together as a unit and what that combination of stellar influences says about the concrete realities of a person's life. So I was very happy when I saw this reiterated within the work of Dr. K.S. Charak, where he says that many Indian medicine texts contain certain references to planetary combinations that cause specific diseases. True, he says, these combinations are too general to be of any great help in medical diagnosis, which I don't necessarily believe is true personally. He says, but they reveal certain principles which can be of use. Similarly, astrological texts are replete with planetary combinations. Once again, planetary combinations. What do the combinations of planets do within the context of a person's life, as opposed to the signs of the zodiac specifically as being a primary frame of reference? Now, I think I have to say that the signs of the zodiac within medical astrology is a treasure house of vital meaning and a treasure house of vital insight. And I think that it's very important that all of us who practice any form of medical astrology have a deep understanding of the role the signs of the zodiac play within that practice. And I think it's probably even more vital that we have a deep understanding of the planetary combinations that underpin or that seem to correspond more often than not with many common ailments that manifest within the lives of people, because understanding the relationship between planets and planets represents a more nuanced way to practice astrology in general. He goes on to say that these combinations are also fairly generalized and not easily applicable to individual charts, which I don't agree with either. I guess I don't agree with a lot that Dr. K.S. Charak has to say, but it's a good quote. He says, they can be of some utility only if the essence of their underlying principles is understood. And so today we're going to be talking about what the essence of some of those underlying principles are. And I'm going to check my time to make sure that I'm staying within the time frame allotted. Now, I want to talk today about a particular thing that's very near and dear to my heart. When I started studying Iyengar yoga, I studied under one of the top 2 Iyengar yoga teachers in the world, Dr. Lois Steinberg, who made it her life's mission to work with female reproductive issues within the context of Iyengar yoga, medical yoga practice. And the majority of her research is within that field, Iyengar yoga for female reproductive health issues. And so at a very early age, I found myself inundated with the charts of women who had every manner of female reproductive health concern, from endometriosis to adenomyosis to polycystic ovarian syndrome to many, many, many other things. Endometriomas, the list is eternal. And so one of the things I started doing a few years ago was what I called the hysterectomy cases or the hysterectomy files. And I've started collecting and collating some of that research because a big part of what we need to do, as far as I'm concerned, as a community, is conduct research within things so that we can understand not only the patterns that are associated with certain ailments that occur within the person's life, but so that we can also understand how to identify those things and potentially predict those things should we see a confluence of those patterns manifesting within the lives of our clients. So we're going to take a look at some of my files from the hysterectomy studies. And within that, Venus is having significations over the kidneys and the spermatic vessels. Please forgive some of the antiquated language within this notion of Venus and the moon, because it's, from a 17th century text. But Venus is representing the kidneys and the spermatic vessels, the matrix or the womb, and then we have some reiteration of those things. But the biggest thing here is Venus and her relationship with the matrix or the womb. And you can definitely take a look at these slides later. I'm going to send them over to Kay and the OPA team. Similarly, the moon is having a signification over the stomach, and ... all of these things are also vital, but the moon is also having a signification over the womb. The Venus and the Moon are representing female reproductive health, specifically within the context of traditional astrology. And when we take this into the realm of Uranian astrology or cosmobiology, the Moon-Venus midpoint is one of the specific midpoints that we associate with motherhood. So therefore, if we are going to look for issues surrounding the female reproductive system from a Uranian astrology perspective or from a cosmobiology perspective, one of the chief midpoints that we're going to investigate is the Moon-Venus midpoint, because if the Moon means womb and if Venus means the womb, then the Moon-Venus midpoint is the womb. It's the womb squared. So we're going to be taking a look at the Moon and Venus within the context of the upcoming charts, and we also have some midpoint demonstrations that we can take a look at as well. A medical astrologer may consider the following factors while studying a chart with respect to disease. And this once again is coming from Dr. K.S. Charak. He says timing is going to be a critical thing, which astrologers do very well. Diagnosis, which can be done within the context of some modicum, of very large modicum of accuracy. But once again, the notion of scope of practice has to always be observed. The severity of an illness, and in India, which they have far more developed than what we have in the West, is this notion of treatment or the remediation of things that ail us astrologically. Now, moving on, this is a slide. I don't even know why this is in here. This is a slide that I tend to put in just for honorary mention, but we could skip past it. This is an outline of how medical astrology was conducted in the 17th century. It's right within reason, but I have some other ideas. On the luminaries in medical astrology, there is a notion within turn of the century medical astrology, and by turn of the century, I'm referring to turn of the 20th century, that the sun represents the etheric body or the etheric body, and it also represents the physical vitality of the body in general. The moon represents the internal and organic health and the constitution of the body. And what I tell my students is that if we could view the sun or imagine the sun representing the exterior car, if we own a vehicle, the sun is representing the car on the outside, whereas the moon is representing the engine and everything that actually allows the car to function on the inside. From a yoga perspective, we would say the sun is representing Annamaya Kosha, or the physical body, and the moon is representing Pranamaya Kosha, or the physiological body. So this is the sun and the moon, and the ascendant specifically is also denoting the physical strength and the form of the body. Now, astrological factors that inhibit, negatively alter, or destroy health. As I look down at my phone, I realize that we need to speed it up so that we can get to an actual example. But astrological factors that inhibit, negatively alter, or destroy health, Kira touched on some of these earlier. But some of them are afflictions to the ascendant or the ruler of the ascendant, because the ascendant and the ruler of the ascendant exist on a continuum that represents the physical body within this lifetime. The sixth house and its lord. From a traditional astrology perspective, the sixth house is the house of sickness. From a traditional astrology perspective, the sixth house isn't necessarily the house of hygiene or service or any of those things. The sixth house is a house of sickness. And when we apply traditional principles to chart delineation, and someone has a chronic ailment occurring within their lives, that's going to come from the sixth house. It could also come from the 12th house, but the sixth house is definitely implicated. Within the context of my work, I use Regiomontanus houses. That's the only house system I use because I don't personally have the inclination to do anything else, and also because it works more often than not, and by more often than not, 9 times out of 10 within my practice. The 12th house and its lord is also going to represent something that can negatively alter or destroy health from the perspective of a natal chart delineation. And I think it was Joseph Blagrave, who was writing in the 17th century, who said that the 12th house is representing ailments that last longer than a year. So go figure, the 12th house and the 6th house both exist on the spectrum of illness or disease within our nativities. The south node is one of the points within the chart that I call one of the toilet bowls of the universe. I believe the south node is shaped like a toilet bowl for a reason, because from a traditional astrological perspective, the south node is representing a point of depletion. So the dragon eateth at the north node, and the dragon defecateth at the south node, because that is the head and the tail of the dragon narrative. So the south node is representing a point of debilitation as far as health is concerned within the chart. Traditionally speaking, we only take hard aspects to the nodes. We take the conjunction to the node. We do not take the opposition to the node, because it's impossible to say that I have something opposite the south node. You don't have anything opposite the south node. You have something conjunct the north node, and that's the end of the story. Or you could conversely say, I have something conjunct the south node. But you can say, and we also take the squares to the nodes, because the squares of the nodes are called the bendings. The southern bending is the first square moving forward in the zodiac to the south node, and that is definitely representing a point of depletion. So if we have something that is conjunct the southern bending, it is oftentimes something that we're having to make a major sacrifice around within our lifetime. Similarly, the northern bending is representing another crossroad area. And if we have something conjunct the northern bending, that is also something that we have to find ourselves at a major crossroad around within our lifetime. If we have the ruler of the ascendant at the southern bending, it can very well be one of the things that negatively alters our health. The malefics, in particular, Mars, Saturn, and Neptune, are all going to have a negative effect from the perspective of concrete event-based medical astrology delineation. And we don't really have the time to go into why that is. And midpoints that specifically are also complicated from a medical astrology perspective are Mars, Saturn, Mars, Neptune, and the Saturn-Neptune midpoint. Basically, the alterations of all of these factors that we already said were malefic from a medical astrology perspective. The part of sickness is another thing that can be negative from a medical astrology perspective. The part of sickness is going to be a proxy of our sixth house within this lifetime, which means the part of sickness is also going to carry our natal promise surrounding any ailments we might find ourselves having from a natal perspective. Now, every astrological software will calculate the part of sickness for you, but if you want to do it old school, here are the calculations for the part of sickness in a daytime chart versus in a nighttime chart. I'm just going to check in with Kay to find out what the timing is surrounding how much longer I have, because I think that it's close to time, and I would like to get to an example if possible.
Yes, you maybe take another 5 minutes or so. We'd like to have a little time for questions at the end.
Awesome.
To your charts.
Okay, great. So what we'll do is we'll skip beyond the next few slides, and you can get these slides and see these things for yourself later on, but we're going to go directly into the interpretation. One of the greatest books, in my opinion, as far as medical astrology is concerned, but not just medical astrology, but specifically how to talk about planet-to-planet interaction, is The Combination of Stellar Influences by Reinhold Eberton. It is the textbook for cosmobiology, and in it, he gives some insight into what the various planet-to-planet combinations indicate. Now, we're going to be speaking about endometriosis. Here's a slide that gives a brief introduction on what endometriosis is. It's a painful disorder in which tissue that should be within the uterus, within the endometrial lining, starts to grow outside of the endometrial lining, and it creates a very painful set of circumstances. And one of the ways how endometriosis is treated or is addressed is through hysterectomies, and so, or is through suggesting a hysterectomy. And so the charts that we're going to look at are charts of women who've had endometriosis that has subsequently led to a hysterectomy. And I think we have time to go into Katerina's chart in this last 5 minutes. Katerina has had 14 miscarriages within her life because she has a particular condition called antiphospholipid syndrome, which is a condition that is tied in with continuous miscarriages, and she didn't know that. She didn't get that diagnosis until 2015. Here's some information about Katerina. You can definitely look this chart up on your own terms when we are done. Now, here's Katerina's chart, and just some of the outstanding features that we see within this chart. She is someone who has had, first of all, she's someone who has had 14 miscarriages. So if we were to look within the chart just to see what is the story in this chart surrounding children, we're not necessarily saying what is the story in this chart surrounding miscarriages. We're asking the question, what is the story within this chart surrounding children? And one of the things we see here is that she has the moon ruling the 6th house. And like I said to us earlier, the 6th house is a house that's on the spectrum of sickness and the potential for sickness within this lifetime. Now, some people would see this moon in Cancer and think that the moon in Cancer is indicative of something wonderful because the moon is essentially dignified. However, the moon is essentially dignified, but specifically ruling a quote unquote bad house from a traditional astrology perspective. So traditionally, we would say that this moon is a functional malefic. We know that the moon technically isn't malefic in general, but she's a functional malefic. And so we find the moon as a functional malefic in an opposition to Mercury in the 12th house. Mercury is specifically ruling this lady's 5th house of children. And Mercury is in the 12th house in a conjunction with the part of sickness. So we have the moon opposite the children, or we have quote unquote sickness in her chart represented by the moon in opposition with the children in her chart represented by Mercury, the ruler of the 5th house, and also opposite the parts of sickness. Now that's the traditional delineation of this, but the planet to planet based delineation of this is that she has the moon in a square relationship with Pluto. Moon square Pluto. If we take one lunar word and we say that lunar word is womb, and we take one Pluto word and we say that Pluto word is trauma, then moon square Pluto could be a part of a larger story surrounding trauma within the womb story of Katerina, which doesn't happen to be her actual name. The final thing that I'm going to point out of the many things that are occurring within this chart is that she's also having a quincunx relationship between the moon and Neptune. Now, when she and I sat down to have our consultation, one of the things that I spoke to her about was about moon Neptune and contact, and any sort of contact, hard aspect contact. And any hard aspect contact between the moon and Neptune, if we take the moon to represent the stomach in general, moon Neptune tends to manifest frequently as very serious food sensitivities, even more so than moon Uranus, which could manifest just as someone being a picky eater or having peculiarities surrounding food. The moon Neptune is definitely manifesting more often than not as someone who has very severe food sensitivities. I was giving a reading earlier, and the person had moon Neptune quincunx within that chart, and that was also her story. So that is one of the things we see here, and that is true for Katerina as well, that not only is she having this very challenging story manifest within her life as far as children are concerned, but she's also having this very challenging story manifest within her life as far as her digestive system is concerned. I want to take one more minute, if possible, just to show us how these things would look on a dial, because there are other things happening within Katerina's chart that we can't see with our naked eye unless we transfer them onto another template. So here we have not the 90-degree dial, but the 360-degree dial, because I think that that's a more gentle approach to working with the dial, because it looks like a sky that we're familiar with. Here we see that she has the Venus in a semi-square relationship with Neptune, and Venus semi-square Neptune, once again, Venus is representing the womb and Neptune is representing something that is detractive or debilitating to our health. Then we can imagine that Venus-Neptune in combination would represent some story of declined health in terms of that part of her life. We also see that she is having Venus in the square relationship with Chiron, which can also carry the same signification. And just moving forward, the moon we see that she has the moon in a semi-square relationship with Saturn. This isn't an aspect that we would have seen with our naked eye unless we know how to identify those aspects in general. But she has a moon semi-square Saturn story, which has to do with the story surrounding her own being mothered within this lifetime, as well as her own story of being able to be a mother within this lifetime. And finally, on this, we see, like I said earlier, the moon, Venus midpoint is going to carry signification of motherhood within anybody's lifetime. And here we see that her moon, Venus midpoint is running simultaneously with her Saturn, Neptune midpoint. And we remember that I said earlier that the combination of Saturn and Neptune is one of the more challenging combinations as far as health is concerned. And even if we didn't know what her specific story was, we could take a look at the moon, Venus, and call that motherhood, and Saturn, Neptune, and call that chronic illness, because Saturn, Neptune is the midpoint of chronic illness. And we could say that motherhood, moon, Venus, will or could potentially be a source of chronic illness within the life of Katerina. So this is just a taste of what some of the things we can do with a more planetary-based approach to medical astrology. And I sincerely hope that you got something from this presentation. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much, Michael. That was a wonderful presentation. And I know just the tiny, tiny surface of what is possible. And many of you who are listening, you know that OPA Live panels, people write an article. So Laura and Kira's articles will be available in this June issue, along with a whole lot of other great medical astrology articles. And Michael's will be available in the September issue. And, you know, we understand because he just published that book. So he's been going in a lot of different directions. And we had so many good medical astrology articles, honestly, that we will be continuing to publish some of them in the upcoming issues. So I felt like we got such a big reception to this topic. It seems that, you know, astrologers really want to know more about medical astrology. So Jeannie, can you take the specific questions from the chat and
Sure.
ask either Michael or everybody, and Laura and Kira, you can come back on screen and we will have a few minutes together.
So this one is for Michael. What orbs do you use for aspects?
I use a 5 to 7 degree orb for aspects in general. The tighter, the better. And if I'm using something such as a semi-square or a sesquiquadrate, I use a 1 degree orb.
Perfect. Perfect. And that is all the questions I have. I have only a lot of awesomeness for all of our speakers. And they are, oh, I have another one. Please clarify how we can access the slides. Okay. I was saying, I had said that personally that you should email the presenters, and then we can do it either way. If the presenters send them to us, we can send them out. However, it would be if you email the presenters, you have a communication with the presenters as well. So either way will work.
And Jeannie, can I just say that there's I made a bit of a magazine of sorts for my recent NORWAC talk for this presentation. So if people reach out to me, I'll send them the magazine, which outlines step by step how to practice in this way, as well as the slideshow. That's not a problem.
Well, that's wonderful. Now, Michael, did you want to send that to me as well? And I can put it in with recording, because we do sell the recording of the OPA Live, and I'm going to include those slides with the recordings. So great.
Awesome.
And can we double check your email, Michael? Jeannie posted the primordial email. Okay. Is that the right one for them to write to you?
It is, but the professional one is hello@oraculosastrology.com. I just put it in the chat. And if anyone wants to reach out to me, you could find me via my website at oraculosastrology.com.
That's wonderful. That is so much. I have a couple of other questions. Can Laura talk about her course next week?
Yes, I will be starting it on Saturday, the 17th at 9:15 a.m. California time, Pacific daylight time. And in that course, I actually take the people's charts who join in, and we use them as our reference point for all the different things, but also the basics. I will go through that again, so you really get down what the planets and the signs, but I will obviously, because I am a midpoint specialist, that's really important to me that we go into midpoints and look at it for timing.
Great. I have a question from Michael. How much do parallels and contraparallels come into the picture?
Parallels and contraparallels is some of the most important hard aspects that exist in the universe. And so they do factor very strongly in the picture as far as medical astrology delineation is concerned. And you'll see parallels and contraparallels within the slideshow because I religiously use parallels and contraparallels within every aspect of my astrology.
Perfect. Do any of the presenters have referral partnerships with medical professionals?
Oh, sorry, what was that question?
Do any of the presenters have referral partnerships with medical professionals?
It depends what you're asking about as a medical professional. I'm a medical professional. I know Michael practices some medical, what's the word I'm looking for, Michael? Yeah. So yeah, some of us are medical professionals as well. Neither of us are doctors. I don't have any doctors I specifically work with. No, like medical doctors.
Are you asking about referrals if we refer to a medical professional?
Yes, I think that's the question.
Yeah, I did too. And
I
do that.
Relationship?
If it's structural, then I would refer to a chiropractor. If it was the actual whole system not running correctly, I might want a completely different type. But allopathy usually is not where I'm going to go with it. An herbalist, I would want that type of thing.
Laura, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, yeah. I was just saying, so in terms of my side of things, I'm an Ayurvedic counselor, and so that's something that I do. And also within my Iyengar yoga practice, we have a very specific protocol for working with common ailments. But I definitely, similar to everyone else, if someone is coming with something and it's beyond the scope of my practice, I definitely refer it out. But in terms of medical astrologers who do that religiously, Nicholas Smuts-Alsop, I think she is the greatest medical astrologer in the West, in the world, as far as fertility astrology is concerned. And I know that Nikki does work with gynecologists rather consistently in terms of the context of her work. So if you all want to know anything about fertility astrology and how she bridges that gap between her work and working with gynecologists, she's the best person on the planet to talk to about that, I believe.
Yes,
That's
totally
great.
agree. I do refer to her.
She's amazing. Absolutely.
Laura, can you put into the chat how to register for your course? And I have one more question here for Michael. Does the quincunx from Neptune to the moon change in nuance based on the houses involved?
I'll say yes and no. And the larger thing is the no, because when I'm looking at a chart from a medical astrology perspective, one, I'm using hard aspects only, hard aspects, which includes the parallels, which includes the squares, the semi-squares, sesquiquadrates, as well as the quincunx. And the interpretation of that is just going to be, in my mind, Moon Neptune. So the house factor isn't really as big a deal as the fact that we have a hard aspect conversation going on between the moon and Neptune. And the same is true for any other hard aspect combination. As far as working with those aspects is concerned, it's just the planet to planet, and the whole narrative surrounding the houses just doesn't come into effect for me.
Great. Based on our charts, we all have physical ailments. Should a person not then focus on the spiritual aspect? What was Katrina meant to learn on a spiritual level?
I think that's a wonderful question. And I think within the context of giving a more fuller reading for Katerina, that would be something to dive into in that. However, she came to book a medical astrology reading and she wanted to understand how her chart spoke about some of the very serious things she's had in her life. She's had 14 miscarriages. She's been borderline ovarian cancer. She's had a hysterectomy because a doctor did a botched job on her. She's had a leg amputation. Her lower right extremity has been amputated. So, I mean, when it's easy for us to talk about the spiritual context of things from one perspective, but she came and she wanted to understand how those things specifically showed up concretely within her chart.
Great. The next question is, what if the ascendant is involved in the quincunx?
It depends on which planet is quincunxing the ascendant. Traditionally speaking, we say that if a planet has a quincunx relationship with the ascendant, then the house that planet rules is going to be, it's like blending oil and water with that person. So if you have the ruler of your 7th house in a quincunx relationship with your ascendant, then that can be that you and your partner just don't get along, because it's like blending oil and water. You have the rule of your 2nd house, quincunx the ascendant, then that can be you and your money aren't getting along. So I mean, it depends from a traditional perspective which house that planet rules. And if it doesn't rule a house from a traditional perspective, such as Uranus, Neptune, or Pluto, then we interpret that quincunx as just having an effect on the person's physical environment in general, because the ascendant also represents not just your physical body, but also your physical environment. So Uranus quincunx the ascendant could be that you come from an environment that's fundamentally unstable. Neptune quincunx the ascendant could mean something else. So it really depends, and it depends on which chart we're looking at.
And the last question I'm going to take is this after we've hit time, I believe. What were your recommendations for Katrina, or were there any recommendations for Katrina?
Katerina is a registered nurse. She's a registered hospice nurse. So for the most part, she works within the medical system, and she wasn't really coming for a recommendation. She was coming because her acupuncturist sent her to me, because she wanted to know, how do all of these things show up within the context of her birth chart? And if there was a context, if there was some larger pattern that her life was fitting in outside of the context of just her not knowing whether or not these things were random or not. So she was coming for that, and she really wasn't coming for a prescription. She works consistently with doctors within her professional work. She was coming simply to see how these things manifest within the context of her life.
Great. Thank you so very much to everyone and their wonderful questions and their wonderful talks. This was great. I'll give it off to you to close off, Kay.
Yeah, I just want to thank each one of you for being here. I want to thank the very attentive and interested audience. It was a beautiful OPA Live presentation. I'm sure many people will come back and listen to the recording, see the recording, and get all of your slides. So great gratitude.
Thank you so much.